So good morning, everybody, and nice to see you all in photographs. Hope you're all well. Apologies, please.
So, Joe Harris. I know Nigel Robbins is attempting to join, so he will be with us shortly. I haven't heard from Ray.
Okay, well, we hope they'll be able to join us soon. Minutes of the previous meeting. Is everybody happy that that's a correct record? I'll take silence as being consent. Thank you.
That's fine, Sean, yeah.
We'll go on to declarations of interest. Anybody other than the known interest which people have declared, anyone which they feel they want to declare because it's specific to the agenda, for example? Can I take therefore silence as being excellent? The work plan. I haven't got any comments on that personally. I don't know if Simon's got any comments on it, or Stephen.
I would just say later on in the agenda, you'll be discussing arrangements for budget scrutiny, which is your next meeting in January. Indeed. And then you will have one meeting then in March, which is prior to the election. So I guess you can have more discussion around that later on.
Okay, everybody happy about that? So can we now go on to the strategic performance management report in quarter 2020-21, and let Rob, your tour de force, Rob.
Thank you, Chair. That's quite an introduction to follow up. Stephen, will you display the slides, or do I need to?
I can put them up there if that helps. Just give me a minute to load them up for you.
Okay.
Now, you all okay, Nigel? It's just he's not muted. He's muted at the moment. Just checking he can hear us. And
yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, it's all good, Nigel. Okay.
Can I also give apologies, please, on behalf of Joe Harris, who's not able to be here at the meeting?
Yeah, we've got him. Yeah, we've got him, Nigel.
You've got that. Fine. Okay, thanks.
Yeah,
That's lovely. I've got the slides up too. Thank you. Right.
Thank you, Stephen. If I can have the next slide, please.
For some reason, it's not letting me move to the next slide. Just give me a second.
Yeah, we go.
There we go. Thank you very much. Okay, so this graph gives a high-level overview looking at all of our corporate performance indicators and breaks them down by the percentage that are on or ahead of target, the percentage that were within target, and the percentage that are behind target. And you'll see that at quarter two, 69% are on or ahead of target, and a further 8% are within reach of target, which is an improved position, not only since quarter one, but since the same period last year. And that's the highest level of indicators we've had on or ahead of target in recent years. Partly reflects the fact that we did a review, as you'll remember, of the corporate data set just over a year ago to make sure that we really were measuring the things that most closely aligned to the priorities that we'd agreed through the council strategy. So part of it is about refining that data set to make sure it really is reflecting our priorities. But it also reflects the fact that there's hard work going on in a number of service areas to improve. And a large part of that improvement in the overall picture is due to the improving picture of performance in children's social care, which had been an area that was dragging back corporate performance for a number of quarters previously. Next slide, please. So just continuing that narrative, this slide shows you some of the most important indicators of timeliness in terms of our response to children who may be at risk. And who were referred to children's services. So the blue line at the top, the light blue line, is initial decisions made, so triaging contacts into the MASH and doing that on time. The second line, the grey line, is initial visits to children where we have decided that there may be a risk, and so continue with an initial assessment. The timeliness of that initial assessment is then the purple line. And you'll see that all of those are in the 80s or above. Now, we're setting our targets these days to compare ourselves to good and outstanding local authorities. So that's a high bar to clear, but you'll see that the top 3 on those graph are on or within reach of target. And that's been a steady picture now for at least the last year. A very different position there from the one that we found ourselves in previous years. And I'm comfortable now saying that we've got sustained improvement in those areas with regard to timeliness. The dark blue line is the one remaining indicator of timeliness where performance is still fluctuating, and that's initial child protection conferences. And you'll see that it dipped in Q3 of last year, improved over the subsequent 2 quarters, and then slightly declined during Q2 to end up at 70%, which is below the target we set for timeliness of calling those conferences. There has since been a lot of improvement activity and focus on that, and performance during Q3 has begun to improve quite significantly. So I'm optimistic that will be back on track for the remainder of the year, but we'll continue to monitor it and report it to you. Next slide, please. That's not to say that there aren't still challenges within children's services, and you will be aware of some of those. The next 2 slides focus on some of the areas where we've still got more to do to get performance to where we need and want it to be. This slide looks at 2 elements of placement stability. Those children in care who've been in care for at least 2.5 years, who've had the same placement for 2 of those years. So in that instance, we're looking for performance to be high. A high percentage is good performance. At the moment, we're only achieving 61% against that indicator and are below target. The other indicator looks at short-term placement stability and measures the percentage of children in care who've had 3 or more placements within the last 12 months. So we're looking for a low percentage in that instance. And you'll see that we're above target, so behind target for both of those indicators. Now, it's worth reflecting, as I have done on previous occasions, that there is an order in which improvement happens. The first thing we would have been expecting to improve is the timeliness of our response. One would hope then that would also begin to impact on the quality of social work, and I'll come on to that in the next slide, and on the stability of children's placements. So this graph itself isn't necessarily an indicator of quality of practice, so much as an indicator of whether the right placements are available in the market when we need them for children in care. Although there are elements of practice to this one as well. So it's quite a complex story with this. It's both about making sure that the market has got what we need, and that's an ongoing and long-term challenge for us. But it is also about making sure that when children enter care, they do so in a planned way, and that we are giving the market every opportunity to provide the placement that we need. And that's also an area where we need to continue to improve. Next slide. Another indicator of long-term quality is the extent to which we see children coming through the system for a second time or subsequent time. And this graph looks at 3 elements of that: re-referrals into the MASH, children who are being put onto a child protection plan for a second or subsequent time, and children being admitted to care for a second or subsequent time. Now, these really are long-term indicators of quality. We know that we always knew these would be the last ones to improve in our improvement journey, because you carry so much legacy with you in these indicators. So much of what shows up in these indicators is an indication of what's happened at earlier stages in these children's lives. And it's disappointing that we aren't yet seeing improvement against these 3 indicators. These will be probably amongst the last to improve, and we do need to keep a focus on them until they do. There are other earlier signs of improvement in the quality of social work, though I don't have a graph on it, but you'll probably know that each month we carry out a number of independent audits of children's social work cases. and those audits are graded according to the Ofsted descriptors, so inadequate, good, outstanding, and the proportion of those audits that are found to be inadequate has been dropping consistently over recent months, and we now have, there's always an element of inadequate work in any authority, even an outstanding authority, and ours is now down at a level that we would want to keep it at. So there are signs that quality of practice is improving and it's consistently and sustainably improving, but there's still further to go on that journey to make sure that we're making the lasting difference that we want for children and young people. Next slide, please, Steve. This colourful slide looks at this is what we call balance of care. This is the number of people in different types of adult social care. And since the writing is quite small, I'll talk you through those categories. So at the bottom in the green, we have residential care. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way down. It's the blue at the top is residential care. The next one down is residential care with dementia, then nursing care with dementia, and then the red, amber and green towards the bottom is community care, high cost, medium cost and low cost, going from top to bottom. Now you will know, because I've used this graph a number of times in the past, that up until the beginning of this year, our numbers were reducing as a result of the three-tier conversation work that we've been doing across the board, and demand coming into adult social care was slowing, and in particular the numbers coming into long-term residential and nursing care were dropping quite significantly. That trend has continued, but I suspect for different reasons with respect to residential and nursing care. So we are still seeing lower numbers going into residential and nursing care. Increasingly, COVID is a factor in that, that it's a less desirable option for people at the moment, and people are choosing to continue to receive care within the community rather than to go into residential care for the reasons that you'll all understand. What we have seen, though, which is a change to the trend, is growth in the numbers of people receiving high-cost community care. And that's part of that is as a result of the factor that I've just described, that people are choosing residential care over nursing care, and the very fact that they may have been eligible for nursing and residential care means that the care they need in the community is more significant and therefore higher cost. There is another factor playing into this, though, and that is that community care within that category, there's care that's being provided from COVID budgets, both as a means of getting people out of hospital in a timely way, but also as a means of avoiding admission to hospital, if we can possibly do so in order to reduce pressure on the NHS at the moment. So at the moment, that red band is inflated by the fact that we have those people sat within it, but who aren't being funded by the county council directly, or at least they are, but through the ring-fenced through the COVID funding. Now, that could play out in two ways. As we move out of the pandemic, we may see those numbers return to normal, or it may be that some of those people who are then assessed go on to need more ongoing care, and that affects demand for those services in the longer term. That's something that we'll keep a close eye on, and we'll continue to report to the committee. And I've asked for future versions of this graph that the team separates out those who are in community care for other reasons from those who are there on a COVID budget, so that we can more clearly see the impact of those two and use that to understand any future risk that we may be building up. Next slide, please. This slide looks at long-term adult social care users and whether or not they have had a Care Act compliant review or reassessment of their needs within the last 12 months. And you'll see that performance against that indicator dropped towards the end of last financial year and into the first quarter of this year, but has started to increase again going into this year, but still isn't where we were aiming for it to be. It's not far off at the end of Q2, but not quite where we were aiming for it to be in terms of that improving trajectory. Now, that clearly that doesn't mean that nobody has got sight of whether individuals' needs have increased or not. The very nature of people who are receiving adult social care is that they're either in a nursing or residential home where professionals are in regular contact with them, or they're receiving domiciliary care in their own homes where the same is true. And so the mechanisms are in place that where it's clear that somebody's needs are increasing, they're brought forward and prioritised for a review or reassessment. So this doesn't represent a risk to the individuals. Nevertheless, it is an area where we're looking to see improved performance in the second half of the year, acknowledging, of course, that there are lots of additional pressures on adult social care staff at the moment, and so work does need to be prioritised. Next slide. This slide looks at our performance in reabling people and tells a mixed story. In terms of the number of clients who need no long-term care after reablement, you'll remember our strategy is to use reablement as a means of reducing people's ongoing needs so that we help them get back to independence, and hopefully as a result of that they need less support on an ongoing basis. And in that respect it's really quite successful. We're seeing 91% of clients who at the end of their reablement episode don't need ongoing care. But where we are seeing more fluctuation is in the number of repeat reablement episodes. So folks coming back through the system a second or third time. Now, there's lots of work going on at the moment to review reablement processes. This indicator focuses particularly on those who are going through our formal reablement service. A number of our domiciliary care providers are also contracted to provide reablement and to support people to achieve greater levels of independence, and those aren't captured in this graph. So it's not a complete picture, but there's a lot of service redesign going along to make sure that we really understand the impact of reablement and can improve its effectiveness going forward. Next slide. Moving out of adult social care into public health now. I'm very conscious, so I will acknowledge it, that given that we're dealing with it, we're looking here at a data set that predates COVID. It doesn't well reflect the focus of the public health team's work at the moment. You will appreciate that what they were doing this time last year is very different to what the majority of them are doing at the moment. And so for next quarter, we are going to start to try and bring in some data that gives a better picture of the work that they're doing in response to COVID. But you'll know that in the meantime, I've brought separate presentations to this committee to try and give an overview of that. But turning back to what was an element of their day job, this graph is looking at our alcohol, opiate and non-opiate treatment performance, which has been stable and successful and compares well to others in the region and nationally, and has done so for a while. But at the end of Q1, you'll see in the little table at the bottom that performance against treatment for opiate users has just begun to fall slightly. You'll see from the graph, it's not a major decrease, but it is a decrease, and we are, as a result of that, missing our target this quarter. Now, you'll appreciate the circumstances under which this service is being delivered have become much more challenging, and for the users of that service, their own circumstances are much more difficult. So it's understandable, you might say, that performance has dipped against this indicator. But again, it's one that we're going to keep a close eye on to make sure that there's not a more significant downwards trend going forwards. Next slide. Moving into Colin Chick's area. This is looking at two elements of our climate change strategy: renewable energy and council carbon emissions. And I want to point out that both these graphs are cumulative in nature. So the reason that the bars get significantly bigger towards the end of the year is because of that. So you really need to compare Q1's performance with Q1 of the previous year. And you'll see, first of all, on renewable energy, our generation for the current year to date. At the end of quarter one, these reports a quarter in advance. At the end of quarter one, we'd generated as much energy as we had done by the end of quarter three in the previous year, and slightly more. So really positive story there. Similarly, in carbon emissions, we are lower than the level that we were, quite significantly lower, 2/3 lower than we were at the end of quarter one for the previous year. Next slide. This is looking at highways performance, another area that performance has improved significantly since this time last year, and one of the few areas that's been helped by the fact that roads have been quieter than usual. But you'll see against all three measures of timeliness, we are at 99%, which is ahead of the target that we set for ourselves. So for both 2-hour repairs, 28-day defects, and 24-hour defects, all are at 99% at the end of quarter two. Really strong performance. Next slide. Similarly, the number of casualties on the county's roads has reduced significantly. Now, obviously, the fact that people haven't been using the roads as much may have contributed to this, although often when the volume of traffic decreases on a road, accidents increase because traffic is moving more quickly. So it isn't automatic that less traffic equals a reduction. Either way, it's really good to see a significantly lower levels of casualties at quarter one this year than for the previous year. Next slide. This is an area that has suffered as a result of the first lockdown. This is looking at the number of safe and well visits undertaken, and in order to make it more comparable with other areas, is looking at that in terms of a rate per 100,000 population. I'm getting a little bit of echo, so I don't know if somebody could go on mute, please.
It's Ray. Ray's just joined. I've muted him, Rob. It's all right.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you very much. So as a result of the first lockdown, the number of safe and well visits that we were able to undertake was significantly reduced. You'll see in quarter two that's increased slightly, but we're not going to be able to hit our targets in this area for the year. You might remember that we did have a significant backlog during the first part of last financial year. The fire service worked really hard to bring that backlog down, and has virtually eliminated it by the end of the year. But lockdown hasn't enabled us to maintain that position, and as a result, performance has slipped. We've included on this graph for comparison what the average performance was for our statistical neighbours and for England as a whole over the previous year. But please do appreciate that was for the previous year. So you're comparing performance that's been affected by COVID against performance that wasn't affected by COVID. So it's important to bear that in mind. We do have anecdotal evidence from other fire services that they've had a similar drop in performance, and therefore we don't believe we're out of kilter with other areas in respect to this indicator. Next slide, please. Another positive story, which is the significant impact that working from home seems to have had on the number of days being lost to sickness per full-time equivalent. And that's because often, people who may have not felt well enough to come into the office, and so taken a day off to avoid spreading illness to colleagues, if they're feeling well, can carry on working from home, and therefore that reduces the number of days absence that we're incurring. So we are well ahead of target, well ahead of the national average in terms of this indicator going into quarter three. Next slide. This is another area that's had an impact, where COVID has had an impact. And that's the percentage of times that we hit the legal time limit for responding to requests for information. So that's freedom of information requests. but it's also subject access requests where individuals that have had some involvement or maybe been a member of staff of the council ask to see the records that we hold about them. And you'll see that that performance dropped before COVID. We had problems last year maintaining that performance as a result of significant numbers of staff changing within the team and new staff being needed to be brought in and trained up. And just as that was improving during Q4, things started to get more difficult again. And as a result of COVID, we have now got a backlog of requests that we're working through to catch up. We are improving. You'll see Q2 was better than Q1, but we don't expect to be able to eliminate that backlog during this financial year. So we don't expect to hit the target for this before the end of the year. We have brought in extra resources to begin clearing that. But it's going to take a while to get back to the levels of performance that we want. It's also worth bearing in mind we are seeing significant increases in the number of subject access requests we get and in the complexity of any individual request, such that a single request at the most extreme can involve several weeks worth of work for one person. So some of these are substantial requests for information that are very difficult to deliver within the timescale set for us. Next slide. This slide summarizes the information that you've got within your papers for the meeting about risk, and just shows the position at the end of the quarter, how many risks we have at each level within our risk matrix. As you've got the detailed information within your packs, I won't talk through this slide. I'll leave you to refer to that because that shows you where the risks are that have either increased, reduced or stayed the same. But obviously if you have any questions on this or on any of the other information I've shared with you, then I'm very happy to take those now. Thank you.
Very much. Now, has anyone got any questions or issues they want to raise?
We've got Kate and Ian.
So I'll let you sort out them in turn. Kate, I think you're first by the comment.
Thank you, Chair. And a couple of questions. One is relating to our children's services performance, and I don't think it's on the slides, but do you have any details about the length of time that children are staying on plans? Because I remember that was a particular issue, and if we're seeing the continuing issues with re-referrals, are we actually progressing children through plans? I do appreciate that might have been more difficult than otherwise would have been possible because of the circumstances we've been in this year. And then I've got a question on a different slide.
Rob?
I don't have the data in front of me, but it is something that I receive on a monthly basis, and I know it's an area where there's been significant improvement, and it's not seen as being an issue for us or a concern for us anymore. So I'm happy to reassure you on that we have small numbers now who are on plans for 2 years or more, and those that are in that situation are really closely monitored and progressed.
Okay, well that's good news. Also, a question about the alcohol and opiates and other addictions services. Obviously, we've had the everyone in policy this year where everybody who was homeless was brought in and put into accommodation. And I've got a couple of concerns. One is, was that an opportunity we could have taken, and did we take it, to actually engage with people who have these addictions and try and get them into services, or was that not possible? And then also, was there an impact, in fact, of gathering people together who've all got, or many of whom do have addiction and mental health problems, and then that actually acting as a kind of, an opportunity for people to, get worse rather than better, in that, availability of substances, encouragement from others to get involved with drug taking or drinking or whatever, because I've certainly seen some evidence on the streets of sort of large gatherings of people and so forth. So, did we take the opportunity? Was it possible to get in there with some treatment and support for people? And did actually we create a kind of hothouse for these behaviours that has been unfortunate in its knock-on effects? Thank you.
On the first point, absolutely we did, and wraparound support was provided. As you say, it was a potentially a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to help some of the most troubled people that are known to us. And I know that this wasn't just a matter of housing them on a temporary basis, that we and the district councils use that as an opportunity where possible to tackle some of the complex problems that these people face. But as you'll appreciate, the nature of some of these people's issues mean that they're not easily solved and not quickly solved. So that opportunity will have only worked in some of the cases. With regards to the second point, I'll need to find some more information out and perhaps get a briefing out to you on that. I suspect that the reality is that lots of these individuals would have been known to one another and mixing with one another while they were on the street, so the impact of bringing them indoors maybe isn't as great as might otherwise be expected. But I will you and see if we can get some more information on it. Before I take Ian's question, sorry, I've just remembered there was something I meant to flag up to you at the beginning of my presentation but forgot to do so, which is that there is just one slight error in the Q2 scorecard within your packs, and that's the statistic for the percentage rather of children in care who are persistent. The scorecard shows a figure of 23% for Q2. It was in fact 17.4%, and we'll get that data corrected before it's published again next quarter. Sorry, I meant to mention that at the beginning but forgot.
Thank you. Who's next?
So we've got Ian and Leslie after that. So Ian next.
Yeah, Rob, I'd like us to look at the chart on page 14, which is about adult services, the balance of care. Now, since I've been a county councillor, that's about 7 more years, we have been following the policy, which I totally agree with, which is to try and keep people supported in their own homes rather than put them into residential care. It's good for them. And it's also been, incidentally, good for our finances as well, of course. And social care for adults is our biggest area of expenditure. But looking at these charts here, I think there's something really interesting happening with regard to the number of clients in community care, and particularly the number of clients in community care high cost, £500 plus, which is going up significantly. And of course, it's £500 plus could be, well, how much more than £500 is then sort of a question. So I just wondered, does it in some cases actually cost the county council more to keep people in their own homes and supported than it does to support them in residential care? And are such cases increasing? Is there a significant trend going on here? And if so, if it's actually costing more to keep people in their own homes than in residential care, and the numbers in residential care are, if anything, going down, then what are the implications for our long-term finance? I just wondered if you'd like to comment on that, Rob.
I'm happy to comment, but it'll be a repeat largely of what I said when I was going through the slides, that the most significant factor affecting the growth in that red block at the moment is the fact that it includes clients who are being funded through temporary COVID monies, either to allow them to be discharged from hospital into the community, whereas they may otherwise have gone into short-term bed-based provision, or to keep people safe and well within the community who otherwise may have been admitted into hospital. So at the moment, that's causing that high-cost community care group to be bigger than it would otherwise be. And as I said, we will for the next quarter separate out those that are COVID funded from those that are in care, who would normally be social care funded, to give a better and clearer understanding of that issue. I suspect there will be issues going forward in terms of shifting demand as a result of COVID. We just don't know what those will be yet. I can see Steve is indicating, so I'll hand over to him to pick up on that as well.
And I think it's a fair point that Councillor Dobie raises. And to be fair, when we've looked at this, we had the exactly same thought. You know, that could be a worrying trend if they are expensive placements. Hence why Rob's done further investigation and picked up on that issue that we're going to do more work on. And I think your point in terms of the long-term legacy of what's happened in COVID will need examining. We don't know what's going to be the outcome of older people who have survived COVID, you know, and recover with long-term issues and all that kind of stuff. So what we do know is obviously we've seen a drop in residential, and not only in local authority placement residential, but also in private placement residential, self-funders as we call them. So we also need to keep closely monitoring that position to see what instability that causes in the social care market. I think the guys that are working on this have done an amazing job, and they've not reversed the progress that has been made over the past few years. And that was a concern, of course. We will need to keep on top of that. And we will need to monitor the position going forward. But I think it's a fair issue you raise, and we don't want that to be a permanent trend. There are circumstances where individuals have high support costs in their own home, and Margaret and colleagues constantly review that to make sure that we're not just keeping them in their own home for the sake of it, but we're actually reviewing it. And of course, this shows the total placement and allocation. Clearly, some of the nursing allocation would be funded from NHS resources as well. So it doesn't necessarily identify just the cost to the local authority. This is potentially total cost that's in here. So we do a bit more detail on that, but it's a useful summary to draw your attention to issues just as you've done.
Can I also suggest that possibly that adult social care might want to pick this point up, Ian, and indeed Stephen?
The agenda for our scrutiny committee.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, looking at the figures, if you did a
we can't hear
calculation,
you very well, Stephen.
we collected. Sorry.
Stephen, maybe turn your video off. That might be better.
Is that better?
Yeah, much better. Yeah.
No. Okay, thank you. We did a mathematical calculation which netted off the higher cost of domestic by the reduction in the other care. What's the figure? Is it a minus or is it a plus? So overall, is it better or worse?
I think we are on track to achieve what we'd assumed was the adult social care budget for this year.
Right.
So overall, because there were some quite ambitious savings proposals,
yes,
as part of the adult social care transformation, if you like, that was assumed for this year. I think prior to COVID, we were all a bit, will we get there? I think with the assistance of COVID funding, we've been able to get there. I think the point that Councillor Dobie raises about the long-term legacy issues in that still need further investigation. Not just in Gloucestershire, across the whole country. You know, this isn't just an issue that Gloucestershire face, and it's an issue that we need to face across the whole of us. So I think overall we'll be on track for the balanced budget in adult social care. I think we'll need to keep on top of what costs might creep out as a result of COVID, not just next year, but in future years.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Who's next? Did you have a second point, Ian, or is it whoever's next?
No, that's it. As long as it's picked up by our own scrutiny committee. There's more to be done on this. Thanks.
We've got Leslie, and then we've got Brian Robinson.
Okay, Leslie.
Thank you, Sean. Yes, I've got a couple of questions I'd like to ask about the children's services slides. Rob, can you tell me why you particularly use these slides for information? I mean, these as opposed to, I don't know, anything else. It doesn't tell us the number of children in care or so there some information isn't there. But I just wondered why it's these particular slides which are part of this report.
So there are two factors. There's a set of indicators that at the beginning of each year we'll look at the full suite of performance indicators for children and say which are going to give us the best overview at a corporate level. So we will include those in the packs that you get. And so the ones that are around timeliness, the first three that are around timeliness, are ones that we think are so significant that you need to be seeing those within your packs. So it's, first of all, it is that kind of look at everything we might collect, which are the ones that seem most important to us, just because they're important. But then each month, my team is doing a much deeper dive into that full suite of indicators. And if there are any that we see that are either suddenly dropping, suddenly improving, fluctuating, giving us cause for concern, then I'll tend to pull those into the graphs as well. It's why we send you out both a standard scorecard, but also a set of graphs that are mine and my team's view as to what the significant issues are for us at the moment. So to give you an example of that slide on timeliness, 3 of those indicators are in the corporate data set, and we're including them because we always look at them, and they're a good test of whether the system is responding in the way that we want it to. That 4th one, the one around initial child protection conferences, isn't one that we track every quarter at Scrutiny, but because it's becoming a concern and because it's standing out now as one of the few timeliness indicators, if not the only timeliness indicator, where we haven't yet seen sustained improvement, I'm pulling it into the slide pack so that you can have a look at it. So it's that mix and match approach, both looking at everything, some things every time, but also highlighting 1 or 2 things each time.
Okay, well, thank you, Rob. The reason I'm asking is because I'm horribly conscious of the fact that for a long time, quite a lot of us sat through meetings being presented with figures which never actually yet told us that things weren't going well. And I wonder how we would ask questions about this, where we would find out that things weren't going well and we should be really concerned. And I mean, one of the slides here talks about placement stability, which is useful. But a critical thing for children's service is the number of social workers that a child that is in our care has, and it is the one thing that the young people will highlight probably more so than anything else, because a relationship with their social worker is so crucial. And some of them have a heck of a lot. Some of the young people who are being fostered have a number of placements, and that is also deeply worrying. So I'm just wondering, looking at these figures, how we could address that. I mean, for instance, the placement stability doesn't tell us whether or not a young person has had 1 or 2 or 3 social workers over 1 or 2 or 3 years. And I think if that were to be highlighted in a way for these meetings, and not just for the people who look at children's part of the Children's Scrutiny Committee, that it would bring it home, not too widely. And I don't know, I'm just wondering, I don't think it's ever too late in the day, that if that is something we should think about. And somehow or another, these presentations always make things sound as if actually things are probably okay. Whereas, of course, as we know, things were not okay, and somehow we need to know that so it can be addressed. So that's my first sort of overall comment about how we could improve the information that is looked at, so that so it's more widely known, and so it stands out. And at some point, I mean, I think Brian would probably agree with me. We look at that and we say, "What on earth's going on there?" So that's my first point. With the deaths on the roads, I wondered if we could have some benchmarks so that we could see whether or not the deaths on the roads in Gloucestershire, or accidents, how did they compare with another county that is similar in makeup and numbers of roads. I mean, on length of roads. Just a stark figure, I don't think is terribly helpful. And the other thing I was concerned about was people who are not reporting to be unwell because more people are working from home. My first question about that is, well, would they own up to being not well if they're working from home, and they might feel well enough to work from home? And if they, and then my next question will be, if you're not well, are you well enough to work from home? Just have this awful scenario of somebody being up, late at night working on a bridge design who's not really well enough, or they're tired because they've been looking after their children all day, and the bridge falls down, and a consequent question about, well, why did this happen? You find out really awkward information. So I think just to show the numbers of people who haven't been reporting to be unwell, isn't really telling us anything. Is this a question for a staff survey, or how would we find out?
So
thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Let me take those in turn. So on the performance question, I'm happy to look at in some of that data around changes in the number of social workers that a child experiences during their time with us. I think you probably get that data as part of the improvement board anyway, in the more detailed reports that you get there. I certainly know we produce it, so I'm very happy to bring it in. On the question, is all in the garden, is all in the garden rosy, or is it just being presented in that way? I think that's a fair challenge. I suppose I would say two things. Not all of these slides are presenting a rosy picture. Some of them are presenting a stuck picture, and in particular the one that's around repeat work. It isn't improving yet. And, although I do hold to what I said originally, this will be one of the last indicators that we see improve. Nevertheless, we know that we are now several years into an improvement journey, and had things moved more quickly, we would have seen that improve by now, and we haven't. I do think as well that there's a danger at this stage. The strategy that we're on is working, is clearly working. There is a sequence to the way that things improve. And while it's disappointing and to some extent troubling that some of these things haven't improved yet, it would be a mistake to abandon the strategy we're on and try to do something different. I think it's about making sure that we maintain the pace and increase the pace of what we're doing. And on that kind of wider question of, therefore, can you trust the information you're getting to be giving you a full picture? I would draw your attention to the latest Ofsted letter. I can't remember the exact wording, but I read it with a wry smile when it talked about the honesty of the performance information that we're putting out there. I can't remember what the word it was it used, but it certainly made it clear that we don't pull any punches when we're looking at children's performance.
My comment about the rosy picture wasn't just actually about children's services. I'm well aware of what's going on in children's services, and yes, it is an improving picture. And so no, it was just an overall feeling that would leave people feeling not a lot to worry about overall. Steve's waving his hand. So yeah, no, that wasn't specifically about children's services. My concern was thinking back about how things have gone over.
Leslie, I think you've made the point.
Okay,
I'd like Rob to finish his reply, which you interrupted actually.
No, I have actually finished.
I was concerned that he misunderstood, because my comment was an overall picture, not just children's services. I'd read the Ofsted letter.
Chair, can I just say, I mean, I think that's a reasonably robust discussion to get into at some point. I mean, it is always a balance on performance indicators between presenting what's gone well, what's stagnant and not moving, and what's reduced. And I think the team try and do that, and hence they bring a debate here. So I kind of always like the way that Rob presents the summary, but also gives you all the detail behind that to pick up. And as you've rightly pointed out, in some cases that needs further discussion in the relevant scrutiny committee to delve a little bit deeper. And maybe some committees can then point back to scrutiny saying, actually, could you keep an eye on that one for us? Because we're quite we're happy with the other stuff that's moved on. And the balance seems to have changed. And that doesn't just apply to children's services. I think that applies to all council performance, that hierarchy, if you like, of the structure of the committees kind of works for me. But it's always a debate. There's always a debate, and we have to make sure that there's a balance between we're not just concentrating on what's yet to be done, but we do give some balance as what's being completed and what's being ticked off. I think particularly in the current climate. Chair, is it okay if I just say a little bit around productivity, which I think Leslie was kind of hinting at in her question?
But of course.
I think it's a fair challenge. I think it's a fair issue for us to be aware of and keep on top of. One of the comments that we've had back from staff is that they appreciate the improved flexibility they've got in the current working arrangements, so that if you do have to nip out to pick your kids up from a school run or do whatever, then that you've got that flexibility. And that's particularly, I've heard that comment in my staff workshops from working mums who have said that more. And you know, I'm doing more of that than I used to do, and my wife is quite pleased about some of that. I think we need to recognise the pressure, however, and we are trying to recognise that pressure that is coming with that. So there comes a responsibility on management, not just to assume that everything can continue and you can keep loading extra and extra stuff on. We've got an amazingly productive and resilient workforce, but we can't just keep loading more and more on. And I think in the current discussions that we're having for corporate plan setting for next year, we need to recognise what's not going to get done and what is going to take us longer to get done. Hence the discussion Rob said earlier about PDRs. You know, we've had to say to staff that has to be something that slips, and we recognise that. There'll be other things. There'll be other things on service plans that colleagues are working on that won't happen as fast as we wanted it to. But we're alive to the issue, Leslie, and I think we have to keep doing more of those pulse surveys and questions and staff groups. And I've set one up, for example, with the whole directorate, where we're going to have a Q&A session with the whole directorate and kind of let them tell us how they're feeling. And I think we need to be live to that issue and listen to what staff are saying, whilst we also start to do some planning for the future. So it's a fair challenge, and I think we need to keep on top of it and look at the other measures in our teams that we can help on that productivity scale, whilst not being overburdening additional teams and additional resources.
Thanks, Steve. That's very encouraging, in fact. Who else has any questions?
Brian Robinson.
Didn't get the question about the roads answered.
Can you remind me what that was, Leslie?
Asking whether or not, rather than just have some bald figures, whether or not there could be some comparison with a similar county.
Yeah, we can get that for you.
Okay, Brian.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
We can't hear you.
Similar topic, so I hope it doesn't feel like a repeat. Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes,
yeah, that's good. That's good, Brian.
Can you hear me?
You might want to turn your video off. Your stroke.
Yeah, I'm going to stay on the same sort of topic. Okay, I will do. Is that better?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, well, carry on. My question really is to probably Rob and Steve about the way the data is presented, because we are presented really with quantitative data where we're counting people a little bit as if they're widgets, that they're all the same. So when we say we've hit sort of 86%, that sounds very good. But of course, people aren't like that. They're all different. And if that sort of balance that haven't been reached are the most complex, that might actually mean that 50% of our workload is only being done. Because, and whether that's in adult services, whether it's in reablement, there's a danger that when you just look at the numbers going through as if they're all equal, that you're missing what probably is some qualitative data underneath that really tells us whether we're actually helping the ones with the most complex issues, which might be the ones most in need. So my question really is, do you supplement your data collection and management to be able to be confident that your quantitative data you're presenting is actually representative across the board and hasn't sort of ended up selecting all the easy to do, I'll say easy to do people, leaving the complex ones sort of there as a problem? Because obviously with people, those complex ones probably are the ones that are most urgently in need of support.
Yeah, I mean, the data is only ever going to give you one lens through which to view a service, and there are many. And you know what my team tries to do, and I know what you try to do through Scrutiny, is triangulate information, spot patterns, ask probing questions, drop the pebble in the pond, and see where the ripples lead. And I think all of that needs to be part of the way that we approach and think about performance management. So if I take the example of children's. You're quite right to highlight this point, Brian. I mean, we could have looked at the data, and in some instances, the data didn't give us cause for concern. But what it was hiding was some poor practice. So assessments may have been taking place, but they may not have been taking place in the way they needed to. And the help that was provided in response to that assessment may not have been sufficient. So in the case of children's, we now work much more closely with the audit team to understand what they're seeing from a qualitative point of view. Alongside what we are seeing from the numerical data. There aren't those same formal mechanisms in place in all service areas. The same audit regime doesn't exist in adults as it does within children's. It's just not part of their framework or the way that they're regulated. But my team do go out into each locality. I say go out into. They used to go out into each locality once a month. They now sit on one of these screens, the same as the rest of us, looking at people in one locality once a month to really get beneath the skin of what we're seeing in the numbers. So the picture that I present to you isn't just based on looking at a set of numbers and drawing conclusions from that. It's based on the intelligence that my team pick up in going out, meeting with teams on the front line, understanding the issues for those, and then looking whether that aligns with what we're seeing in the numbers, and if not, what that might be telling us. That then gets fed up to me and onto you through these presentations. So you know you can never be complacent about these things. And we need to have a number of mechanisms in place to spot where and if all isn't well. But I'm confident, much more confident than I was when we were inspected by Ofsted those years ago, that we've got a really robust system in place for looking at those kinds of issues.
Thank you. That's good to know we've got it sorted for children's, but we need to perhaps look at some of the others.
Sorry, I may not have been entirely clear. So when I was talking about the teams going out to localities, that does stand for adults as well, and increasingly for fire service and other areas of the council as well, where we're going out and meeting not only with management teams but with some of those on the front line.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you. Anybody else wanting to speak, please? Ask a question.
Hurst, Sean.
Sorry?
Stephen Hurst.
Oh, Stephen. Sorry, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to be accused of teaching my mother to suck eggs here, but of course the rate of change on different subjects happens at different rates. And sometimes you have to wait for the more difficult result, which is the total sum of all the subsidiary results achieving their targets. By getting that subsidiary achievements, you could well find to achieve the overall target far easier. Nothing happens at the same rate of progress. Thank you.
Thank you for the point, Stephen. I don't think there's a question there particularly. Anybody else want to make any points?
No one else indicating, Sean.
Shall we move on then to the performance report from
Sean?
Steve? Yes?
Sean?
Yes?
I do apologise, but I'm going to have to leave now.
Okay, Ray, I've got to go too.
Sorry.
I'll let Steve start.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So I think it's the financial monitoring report next, isn't it, Stephen?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm not going to talk for very long on this. I'm going to open this up for questions if that's okay. I think the report is, is fairly self-explanatory, and it's the one that we presented to Cabinet in, I think, November. I get tracked because we're obviously working a month behind and preparing the next report for the December Cabinet. So I think, as this is a well-rehearsed kind of script, really. We've got a handle on what's going off on COVID. There's lots of one-off grants and spend coming in, and we're on top of that all the time. The position on COVID is more or less the same as what we said previously, which is we've been really careful. Colleagues have been really careful not to go crazy on spending on stuff on COVID. Having said that, we are spending, close to £50 million overall, if you include the ring-fence grants. And we think we've got a handle of that. We think we've got, using the unring-fence money and the overspend and the SFC, the sales fees and charges refund that we're due to get back, although we haven't actually had that final confirmation yet. At this point in time, the report that went, it was £3.5 million overspend, and we think we could balance that COVID overspend with all the extra income money that we've received. And then we have a knock-on effect to the children and families overspend of about 4.1 million. And we are closely monitoring that children and families position. It has felt fairly robust, to be fair, that those numbers haven't massively increased as the months have gone on, and we are very, very closely monitoring that. In the budget setting for last year, you'll remember that we put quite a sizable amount of extra money into children's social care. We knew fairly early doors that wasn't going to cover all the costs, and it's stayed fairly close to that figure that we knew it was going to go up by. So we did put extra money in. We always get growth in cases in children's social care, but we've not seen the exponential growth that we saw in previous years. So the overspend position has remained fairly robust compared to previous months. Clearly, some of that is down to COVID. We were anticipating some of that being down to COVID. I think I'm going to leave it there, Chair, if that's okay, and allow questions.
Very much. Does anybody want to ask some questions? Yes, Brian.
Yeah, thank you. Just a question for Steve, really. You clearly got a handle on what's happened. I just wondered how confident you are that in the remaining part of the financial year, we won't be thrown off course by additional sort of COVID, or I suppose economic consequences of COVID, which are starting to emerge, as longer it goes on. Whether you feel that we now have a good handle on where the risks are and where things might emerge, because obviously it's a moving feast in a way, but we've still got to sort of glide into the end of the year, haven't we?
Yes, it's a good point, and I think we do have a grip on it, and both the directors and the finance business partners meet very regularly, and I have a regular kind of monthly or 6 weekly catch up with those business partners to let them air straight to me if they've got concerns as well. I mean, there's always something that could come out of the woodwork, but I think that if you look at the big risks and overspends, that's normally adult social care, and we've got a grip on that, and we're not making promises to spend on stuff that we can't afford. And Margaret has kept a very close handle on that, and obviously Sarah taking over in January will have another close handle on that, and we've been doing briefing sessions with Sarah to make sure she's aware of that. I think the other stuff that's coming on stream, obviously the test and trace grant, and working on those pilots to get test and trace locally and activity. We're aware of what money allocations we're receiving on that, and I'm not seeing the level of concern that we might have had that people want to go out and start spending millions and millions on that activity. It's got to be targeted, and I think it's got to be targeted to see results change. We clearly are also we're looking at testing and LFT testing and that kind of stuff, and again running some pilots on that. So that's an area of spend that we're keeping a close eye on, and trying to do things at minimal cost while maximum efficiency, if you like, or maximum effect. The other thing that's been quite impressive for me is that MHCLG, which is our government department for local government, are listening. And I've been very impressed. In fact, I've been on a call already this morning with other treasurers, other county treasurers and MHCLG colleagues, and they are listening, and they do listen to the impact. Now, we know we're not the only game in town in terms of local authorities, and there are districts and Mets and unitaries and all that kind of stuff. And some of the allocations skew towards other bodies, other types of council rather than ourselves over time. But I think government are listening to the pressures, both on council tax, sales and fees and charges, and on general expenditure. And that has given me quite a lot of solace since day one, I have to say, because when we started spending additional money in May, we were very concerned about where is this going to go. Government have been listening, and certainly civil servants have been working very closely with treasurer groups to understand those pressures and evidence them. And we've done quite a lot of evidence on the county council network in terms of where that spend is going, so that people can see the evidence and refund local authorities appropriately. So that, if you understand that it's not just what goes off in Gloucestershire, it's the whole kind of network that gives me a little more confidence that we're in the right ballpark as well.
Good, very helpful, thank you.
And we've got Leslie, Nigel and Kate.
Leslie next.
Thank you very much. This is a bit of a macabre question, so bear with me. You said we've spent 50 million on COVID. I'm looking at the papers, the figure's not exactly there, so probably I'm not understanding it. But what I'm interested to know is that 50 million GCC money, or could you tell us how much we've had in all the grants, just a collective sum, and how much the county has put into it? So we would then know whether or not, what's left is happiness or misery, if you know your Mr. Micawber.
Sorry, I don't. I'm a Philistine. I guess the simple answer to your question is, if you look at the table on the top of page 52, that's the 18 million of specific grants, and we've got 31 million of general unring-fenced grants, and then we've got sales and fees and charges on top of that, which we haven't got a confirmed figure yet for sales and fees and charges, which we are expecting 3.5 million for. So the 31 plus the 55 gets us to about 53 million actually, all told. We are trying to keep on top of all those grants, and some of them are flying in thick and fast, I have to say. Even since this report was written, there have been other funding regimes that have come out, particularly what we call the COMF, the Containment Outbreak Management Fund, has caused a little bit confusion in the sector, and some of it is bulk for the year, and some of it is monthly, depending on what tier you're in. So it's become a little bit complicated, and we are monitoring on that kind of progress. I'll take it on board, Leslie, as a fair comment, because I think I'm happy to take away formats and try and look at what we can bring together on a more consolidated picture. What we've tried to do is split out the ring-fenced and the general, because the ring-fence, you can only spend it on that specific activity, whereas the general, you can use it for all the stuff. So, for example, on children's, we've allocated what we think COVID is. If that's a bit more on COVID and a bit less, it's the same pot of money, you just spread it out slightly differently. So, whereas the ring fence, you can only spend it on that activity. The infection control grant, for example, has to go to social care providers, so you can only spend it on that activity. So that's why we've differentiated. But I'll take that on board for future presentations.
And Kate has very helpfully put up the Micawber information, so you need no longer be a Philistine.
Thank you very much. All right. Thank you.
It's Nigel.
Right. Thank you, Chair. And a couple of questions. I'll preface it by a comment. If the Ministry is being so helpful to us, perhaps they could consider moving the Cotswolds back into Tier 1, because the latest table shows us at the very bottom of the table nationally in terms of infections per 100,000. Even below Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly and the Isle of Wight. No, that's a frivolous comment, because things could change very rapidly. The first question is about culture, media and sport. Is the County Council involved in the allocations to cultural institutions? I do know that the Barn Theatre in Cirencester got a very healthy grant from them fairly recently, which will help to keep them alive. So what's the involvement, if there is any? The second question really is about Trevone House, but if you could just answer that first one, please.
We've no involvement on the DCMS allocations. That doesn't come through local government, through county councils at all. I think there are some business-related grants that go through district authorities, but that's more in terms of business rates and that kind of refund stuff. But there's nothing on DCMS comes through us.
Rumours I've heard, which I didn't believe, that the local hunt is applying for a grant to keep itself going from the county council. Rumours of that sort are completely unfounded, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I've not seen anything of that.
Okay, the other one is about Trevone House, and that is, of course, it is going to make an impact on the cost of external placements, and also, I would hope, on the quality of supervision. What's the long-term thinking about a second Trevone House to further carry out those financial and oversight improvements?
Yeah, and it's a good point you raise. I mean, I've done a Trevone House similar in the past. Generally, I mean, I've been really impressed. I've been up to see the establishment before it opened, thank goodness, and quite impressed. And I think the contracting that they've done on it, it looks impressive. The art of all these things is making sure it gets filled with the right kind of circumstances that you modelled it for, and that you don't. I mean, this actually goes to other kind of establishments as well, to be fair, but you don't fill it with people that you just need to fill beds. So, you know, the model has been built up based on that we are putting children in it, you know, post-16 children in it that were costing us a lot of money to place externally. And also, as you rightly say, that the service of care was not right. So we're trying to keep young people closer to Gloucestershire. It's been modelled fairly low numbers for the first few months. I've seen projections that's on track, and colleagues have been identifying those individuals that will transfer across. I think one of the challenges that they might have is, if it's successful, is making sure that those individuals move on, that we don't become reliant on that resource, and that could be an issue for us. You know, particularly for those people that are 18 plus, that we don't. And there is a scaling system built into Trevone. We are already including in capital budget setting discussions for next year the possibility of a Trevone 2 and a Trevone 3. The challenge, of course, and they take time to run through. So, you know, you can't just build it and put people in next day. You've got to procure it in the right way. You've got to make sure you built up the market. You've got to make sure you've modelled which kids are going into it. But yes, we are mindful, whilst not running away with the fairies yet until we've actually made sure Trevone 1 works. So I think we're building in timetables to stagger a bit of that, to make sure that Trevone 1 works, and then we'll crack on. What I don't want there to be a problem with is the capital resource to do it. I want there to make sure that it's modelled in the right way and the decision making is done in the right way. And obviously there'll be a procurement process needed. But it looks good so far in terms of what's going on in Trevone, and they're certainly talking to the service about which kids are going to go into it. So I'm confident things are going to happen. I think we need to keep our powder dry about how long that takes. You know, when do we get up to? I think it's 60% occupation level they need to break even on the scheme compared to what those. But the other challenge in this, sorry to go on a bit, the other challenge in this is you always, when you model it, you compare what they would have cost you to what they are going to cost you in the new model. Once they're in, you only have the new cost. So you can only say, well, they might have cost us this level. You've only got this level here. So you're always thinking woulda, coulda, shoulda. You know, what would it have cost us over here? And you just have to do your best in terms of modelling. Well, they were in this circumstance, but they would have cost us X. You know, they would have cost us £3,500 a week. Going into this establishment, they're only going to cost us £2,500. But it's a bit of a challenge ongoing on monitoring on that, and we just need to bear that in mind as well, because occupation level is probably a key thing in the early stages.
Steve, that's very helpful. Very helpful.
Thank you. Who's next, Simon?
Kate's next, Sean.
Okay, Kate.
Thanks, and thanks, Steve, for this report. I mean, it's good to see that county councils' finances seem to be in reasonable shape despite the effects of COVID, and in part that is due to government grant. But my concern is that, well, not a concern. Clearly, a lot of the good things that have happened around COVID in terms of community support, etc., have been done by working with the districts. And a lot of those community groups are facing significant financial challenges as a result of either loss of income or as a result of having to skew their activity to supporting COVID, something which many of them weren't originally designed to do and wouldn't be their normal activity, or they've had to up what they normally do. So in the first wave, grants were given to all the districts so that they could support this work with either whether it was practical things like food or whether it was in support for organisations in providing equipment or supporting volunteers or whatever. Is there any intention to do that now that we're in now we're in the second wave, and now that we can see that this is going to still be ongoing for some months, and those organisations will face additional challenges through the winter as things become more difficult whilst we're supporting people as they isolate and as they are vulnerable due to waiting for hopefully the wave to pass. So really my question is, are we going to spread some of the financial joy to our districts and our community groups who we've relied on so heavily through this pandemic, and actually make sure that they're still there when we come out the other side of it?
Might start and then ask Rob to say a few bits, because I started on the community resilience cell that we set up, and then thank you to Rob, because I handed over to Rob to attend the meetings more regularly. I think it's a fair comment that we've helped out, and I think it's also a fair comment that some of them are struggling. There's always a fine balance between how much resource you give and how much resource potentially is wasted in the system. We've not made any commitment to fund any additional support, indirect support. And if you remember, originally the activity went into the help hub and the arrangements for the help hub. We've not seen the massive increase in the requests coming through the help hub as part of the second wave. I think it's a fair challenge, and we probably need to think about, with the onset of the latest grant money that we've got, particularly around the school meals and that kind of stuff, how we involve districts in that discussion to make sure that those that need the support are able to get it. And I've made comments, and I've met with colleagues from community groups and around the county. I think it's easier when there's a single issue item to face. So community groups and volunteering generally has seen a massive boost across the county on the single issue item. And I think back about all those years of infrastructure funding, and I mean community infrastructure funding that we've had, Objective One, Working Neighbourhoods Fund, SRB, all those things that went into that. Whereas actually, with very little infrastructure funding this time, and the county council gave some resource into it, but very little infrastructure funding, we've been able to get things up and running really quickly with all the districts' involvement and all the community groups' involvement. And I think we need to recognise what can we do to maintain that, and what can we help to do to maintain that, whilst at the same time recognising that once you move away from COVID, whenever that may be, June, July, hopefully next year, it doesn't become a single issue item anymore. It becomes a wider issue item and a much more harder discussion to focus on where the support goes. And that isn't resolvable over one meeting, but I think it's worth a debate about where can that volunteering support that's been engaged in, how do we capture that and continue to capture that going forward, whilst we don't put a burden around our neck. And one of the reasons why we are in a sustainable financial position is because we've not gone out and put loads of requests and asks and loads of stuff, which I know some councils around the country have done, and haven't been able to sustain it. So it's a challenge for us, and it's a challenge worth us taking on. Rob, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think I'd just reflect on the fact that Steve's right, and the emergency has been a tremendous catalyst for communities coming forward, supporting one another. But my reflection, having been around Gloucestershire for a while and having a bit of a background in community development myself, is that hasn't come from nowhere. It's actually building on probably a decade's worth of work that districts and voluntary sector together have been working on in terms of asset-based community development. Now, I've been around community development long enough to remember a time before we talked about asset-based community development, but actually it was what we were doing. And if I'm being honest, when this new label for it came along, I was a little bit skeptical that it was just clever branding. But actually, I have to say, the last year, like nothing else, has demonstrated that there is substance behind the branding, and it has changed the way not only that we work with local voluntary groups, but the way that we think and behave as councils as well. And actually, that's been really impressive to see. I meet with colleagues from the districts once a week to review how support for community groups is going. As part of that, we have to submit a return to MHCLG to tell them whether we think we've got the capacity to cope for the next couple of weeks. And to date, the response to that has been unanimous, that actually we have got the resources that we need. Now, clearly, we're not over-egging that. We need to make sure those resources keep flowing. But actually, the fact that we have such a vibrant community network, the fact that we've developed the sorts of relationships with those networks that enable us to communicate well with them and to mobilize, has given us a tremendous foundation to build on. And I think the areas that have struggled much more than us are those that haven't had that foundation and have so had to fall back on more traditional forms of council support for vulnerable people. I'm not complacent. This is a marathon, not a sprint, and we need to make sure those resources keep flowing. And I think the county council has made a commitment that if districts get to the point where they need support, we'll underwrite that support. And through keeping that conversation open on a week by week basis, we're being kept aware of where that support might be needed. But certainly in terms of the last 4 weeks, when we've been keeping a particularly close eye on people who are clinically extremely vulnerable, the resources that we've been flowing through the system have been sufficient to meet the demand that's been coming in. Steve mentioned community help hub calls. During the peak of the first lockdown, we were getting hundreds of calls through the community help hub. As things quietened through the summer, we were getting perhaps 6 or 7 a week. But now coming into the autumn period, that's gone up to about 30, 35 a week. So we're not seeing significant levels of demand, but we are seeing a trickle of people that need extra support, and that's available to them when they need it.
Can I just pick up on that? Because I think the fact that the demand's not coming through community help hub shows what a good job our community groups are doing, because people don't feel they have to turn to an organisation like the county, because the organisations are there and they're familiar with them and they're out there doing the work. But that doesn't mean that those groups, that doesn't mean that the demand's not there or that support isn't needed. And I think it's I hope you're going to commit to having that a proper conversation with districts about where things like food provision, where we're reliant essentially on donations of food, etc. It might come to the point where we actually need to up that and actually provide proper food. And I know organisations, certainly in my own division, like the Gloucestershire Gateway Trust, have put in a huge amount of their own money, really, where in other places you would expect councils to have been footing that bill, and you've got to question them ongoing, that money would have gone into other kinds of community activity and work that's really vital. So going forward, there is a gap, and we've asked other people to fill it, and I think we should be actually asking the question, sustainably going forward when other activities come back on stream. Do we need to fill that gap if we're not filling it now, because we're actually taking money out of those organisations, that should have been going elsewhere?
Thank you for that comment, Kate. I'm certain that's been taken on board. Do you have any other questions?
No one else, Sean, as far as I can see.
Thank you, Steve. If no one's got any other questions, we'll move on to what I think is the public participation task group, wasn't it? So I've lost a bit of agenda.
It's the performance report for corporate resources.
Yeah, I'm happy for you to skip over corporate resources if you want. That's fine. But no, it's. I mean, to be fair, Chair, it's similar to what we said last time. To be honest, I think there's probably a number of issues you colleagues will want to raise on. I think corporate resources overall has massively stepped up to the asks. We've got people doing things that probably a year ago they didn't anticipate doing. And I've been massively impressed with the flexibility that we've been able to deliver to our colleagues across the rest of the council. I am acutely aware of burnout, I think. Certainly over the Christmas period, I'm encouraging colleagues to take as much time out to spend safely with family as they can. Because I'm just really concerned about the extra pressure that we're putting on to lots of people. Financially, we're doing okay. Performance-wise, we're doing okay. There's a few issues, as Rob has already flagged, in terms of information management and support, but we are trying to facilitate some of that. And we've got some pressure coming in legal services to support children's, again, which we're on top of and putting some additional resources in that. Some of that is a result of COVID. The rest of it is written there for you to ask questions on if you so wish. Robert, is there anything else you wanted to flag?
No, not for me.
Chair, thank you.
Any questions on that?
None at the moment.
Ask, if I might, if nobody else has got any questions. What is the situation actually in legal services? Because I'm hearing that we're still really quite short-staffed at the moment.
Do you want me to pick that up, Steve?
Yes, please.
So the situation at the moment is that we have sufficient staff to cover the caseload that we have in terms of our operating model, which is that a lawyer should be able to hold a caseload of 12 cases at any moment in time. We've got sufficient staff to be able to do that. We have access to additional resource within Warwickshire County Council. We commission them to take cases for us where we exceed the capacity of the team. Although it has to be said that they are now seeing increases in Warwickshire, so have indicated we may need to find another source for that in future. But what is creating pressure is at the moment we have one or two key members of staff who are off work due to family illness. And as a result, there's less resilience within the team than I would like. At the same time as the team facing the pressure of having to conduct legal hearings over things like WebEx, and you'll appreciate from your experience of council meetings and other meetings that brings new stresses. Add to that the fact that you're doing that in a court setting with a judge that may not be as sympathetic about the technology as we all are. So the team are under stress, the team are under pressure, but we've brought in additional resources where we can to relieve that pressure. The difficulty we have is that there simply aren't lawyers out there waiting to be employed by us. So we rely heavily on locums to meet our core staffing needs. In the longer term, the strategy is to grow our own lawyers, because we're not alone in being dependent on locums. There just aren't enough out there. So we've just had a recruitment drive for paralegals, who we will train up over the course of the next 2 years to be able to take on those lawyer and senior lawyer roles in the future. It's a long-term strategy, but we've had a good response to our recruitment drive. I think I was speaking to Gillian yesterday. It's something like 45 applicants came forward for the last round of recruitment. So we'll be able to fill the vacancies that we've got that begin to help us address that long-term problem. So it's a definite pressure. It's a risk that we're monitoring closely, but as it stands, we've got enough resource to manage the cases we've got coming in, notwithstanding that the team does feel under quite intense pressure at times at the moment.
Thank you very much, Rob. Anybody else?
We've got Ian and Nigel.
Ian?
Sean.
Yeah, I used to be an HR professional, and I'm concerned in the paragraph 3. It talks about completion of annual PDRs, which it's not expanded as to what PDR means, but I guess it's personal development review, or I mean, I think these are given different names as to whether they're personal performance reports or whether they're to do with your individual development. But whatever, PDR, it says it's low, resulting in poor sight of performance levels and raising questions about levels of support and clear direction. Now, I think it's really important that people's performance and their development is being adequately reviewed. And I see here that the level of completion of such reviews is lowest in a children's area. And also notice that when it comes to turnover, the number of social workers in the children's area has gone up. The turnover has gone up in the last quarter to 13%, compared with 10% last year. Now, I think there might be a connection here between people feeling that they're being cared about in terms of their performance and their development, and that being so low. So I'd just like to challenge that and say, well, what are you going to do about it? Because I think there's a link between this low completion rate.
Sean, can I tell you back later? I'm in the meeting.
Sorry, Sean, are you busy there?
I think it's good news. Okay.
Yeah. Right. Can you still hear me? Yeah, this low completion rate and maybe is having an effect on performance. We're falling below professional standards here, and I'd like some assurance that low performance management rate is going to be improved in the next quarter. And I know everyone's under real pressure, but if you're actually, it's a false economy not to do performance management and reporting, even at a time of pressure, maybe particularly at a time of pressure, because the consequences of that are actually stressful for people, and it can lead to higher turnover. So I'd just like to have someone say a few words about what's going to be done about that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And it's a fair comment. I mean, I speaking about corporate resources first of all, and then we'll move on to the rest of the council. We know that performance development reviews, which is PDRs, good point, we need to put that full term in, are one of the things that have slipped during COVID. Now, that doesn't mean that people aren't talking to their teams and aren't talking to individuals. And I know that many managers are going the extra mile to speak more regularly to their staff, because through this medium, you've got to set that time aside because you're not seeing people in passing. What they're not doing is they're not formalising that into an annual performance development review, where they're looking at all those individual targets that I might have set you last year and see where you're at on those. Now, I can excuse that slipping for a while. I think we need to use the spring to get back on track with some of that and revisit some of that. So we're as a management team as well, we've acknowledged that's not where we want to be. We recognise the pressure that the PDRs have had, and we're trying to adjust that as we move forward through the quarters. I think the spring and early into the summer next year will be the time when we reflect on that. To be fair, I'm surprised on the social care one. I don't know if Rob has got any further data on this. I'm surprised it's gone up more. Some of that is because we have been recruiting to posts and letting agency staff go. I'm sure we all heard Richard making comment on that at full council. So some of the turnover isn't just people leaving and recruiting. Some of that is us actively recruiting more posts. But to be fair, council, it's an issue I'd have to take away and do some more research on, unless Rob's got some information. I'm happy to take that away and come back to you on a further response, because I didn't think we were losing social workers, which is what that phrase seems to present. But it may well be that the overall recruitment has increased as we let agency staff go and recruit permanent workers. But I'll come back to you on that as a confirmation.
I don't know if you wanted to add anything. Okay. Shall we move on to Nigel then?
Hi. Yes, have we finished the recruitment process for the head of internal audit? I suspect we have, and we've got a new head of internal audit. And what are the staffing levels in internal audit? I know there's a shared agency with the city and Stroud, but if you could just update me on that, it would be very helpful.
We have. Let me just see if I can get his name. We have finished the recruitment for a head of internal audit. I've done about. Do you know? Weirdly, isn't it how strange? We've actually done lots of recruitment over the last weeks and months. Have I got his name in front of me? Because I've got. Sorry, I'll get you that as we talk. We have recruited a head of internal audit.
I was given his name, but he hadn't been officially appointed at the time. I can't remember his name either, but he comes from St Albans.
Payash Fatania, I think, is the name of the guys, and I excuse my bluntness in pronunciation, because I've just got my notes here. I was really pleased with the appointment, to be honest, because it's a nervy time and it's a key appointment, as you rightly say, and he's got a lot of experience and he's sitting on the national body for internal auditors as well. So I think it is a step up in size, I think, for the large county, but his experience is well versed over many months and many years, to be fair. So I'm pleased with the appointment, and I think it's going to be hard to fill the boots, for somebody that's been here such a long time. But I think I'm pleased with the appointment. In terms of internal audit overall, I've not been made aware of any concerns of resourcing issues. I mean, there's always a challenge on internal audit. I think that there's more things they could do, and they have been helping out proactively across a number of areas on COVID, particularly in terms of grants and facilitating grants that need external support. One of the things that we are changing in the team is we're moving risk management to Rob's area, so that will move a little bit of resource across from internal audit. So I'm getting Rob. He was so pleased to take it on. To be fair, I'm getting Rob to look at the risk management process that we have for the whole council, both operationally and strategic. That's not to say I'm concerned about it. I just think I wanted a different perspective. So that does take a little bit of pressure from the head of internal audit, because they won't need to consider that. And obviously we've got a shared arrangement with the city and Stroud, so I meet regularly, and Paul Blacker, if he was here, meets regularly and sits on that board of that joint body, and again that's gone really well, and is going really well. So I've not been made aware of any concerns resourcing wise. I think it's always tight and it's always nip and tuck, and the internal audit plan reports regularly into the Audit and Governance Committee, but I've not been made aware of any major concerns. We always have to team and ladle some of the outcomes and some of the audits, but I've not been made aware of any major problems.
Thank you very much. I imagine, did you have another question, Nigel, from that?
No one else, Sean.
Anybody else?
No one else, Sean.
In this case, I think we now move on to the public participation scrutiny task report, which I think I'm down to present, actually. I'm going to say I hope that everybody has read the report, and I think we probably need to move on to the recommendations. If anybody wants to ask any questions in the body of the report before moving to the recommendations. Well, let's move to the recommendations. I suppose I'm slightly going to take the first, well, A to E.
And you've got Brian Robinson.
Well, do you want to? Okay, but Brian, ask your question.
Yeah, thanks. All I was going to do really was because the examples of having representation was at HOSC. I thought I would just give a bit of feedback on how effective I think it's been, if you would like me to.
Well, do. So
Yeah.
I was coming on to F of the recommendation. So carry on, because that's what
Yeah.
you're talking about, really.
Okay, well, obviously, I took over at Hosker earlier this year, and I think that was about the time that the pilot was brought in. So I wasn't party to the discussions beforehand. But we've had 3 representations made during the year. The most recent one, which was on the blood phlebotomy service in the Gloucestershire, and particularly in Cirencester, I think was very informative and probably helped the committee then follow up and look at this in more detail. But I think the people who presented those were very well informed, and I think the committee benefited from getting public feedback on some issues that they probably wouldn't have been aware of otherwise. We also picked up comments regarding the Cheltenham and Gloucester hospital changes, which I think were very informative and helped the committee to understand what was going on. So my viewpoint was that it was very well received. I think it helped the committee to complete its work, and I think the people who made the representations felt that it was worthwhile.
Chair, can I make a comment?
Yes, do, Steve.
I mean, I think one of the things I'd like to, I mean, this is all about raising the awareness of the scrutiny processes in the public domain as part of that discussion. So yes, it's useful to get public participation in the meetings, but to be able to do that, they need to know it exists, and they need to know what it does and the kind of questions that it's asking. This forum and using YouTube is all part of that increase. So I would be advocating that post-COVID, we must keep this going. We must keep this public participation, the use of YouTube and the selling the meetings and people going, so that people can see it. And not only for the public, but also for members and for officers. I regularly, it's a bit sad to be fair, but I regularly set aside a couple of hours to catch up on a scrutiny meeting and just let it play out on YouTube to understand what's happened. And the HOS meeting that you were referring to and the discussion that Councillor Robbins referred to, I listened to. Now, I don't need to actively participate in that debate, but a range of issues, if there's a meeting I can't get to, like a pensions committee, where there was a debate from the actuary at the last meeting, a great presentation on the future of pensions, I tuned into after the meeting and listened to. And those, we used to get requests from members and officers for that matter. Oh, that was a really good presentation. Could we get that at our group, or could I get that at this meeting? Well, all you need to do now is go into YouTube and see it and watch the presentation and hear, whether it be on the work that's going on in Cheltenham on the Golden Valley or whatever it is, that you can actually go into YouTube and see those. And that is one methodology we need to publish a bit wider, so that members of the public and everybody else concerned, all stakeholders, can see that active debate is taking place. And that is one way in the future that we can increase the exposure to the public, so they understand the role of scrutiny and how we're doing that, following part on that democratic process.
Thank you for that contribution. Thank you very much. Anybody else want to speak? I mean,
we've got Kate and Leslie.
So who's first?
Kate and then
Kate, please fire away.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to say a few things, as I was a member of this group, and I think it's unfortunate that although I did put in some comments for the final report, for technical reasons, nobody on the task group apart from yourself was able to attend the last meeting of it. I think that's really unfortunate, and I'm not quite sure how that happened, but it did. I'd like to support what Stephen also just said. In fact, I believe it was the scrutiny review recommended that we expand webcasting and broadcast of all meetings, including scrutiny meetings. And I believe, and Simon might want to comment in a moment, but I do believe that is something that was being looked at before we all moved to the virtual world. And he's right. This is a really good way of getting public participation and also just for everybody to see what's going on. And sad that I am, I occasionally even watch other councils' broadcasts, and I have seen council meetings in other parts of the country which have had viewers not in their 10s and 20s, but in their hundreds. I wouldn't suggest that we have votes of no confidence in the leader here, obviously, but it's certainly something that does engage people. So I think that's important. I do have some changes I'd like to make the committee to consider making to the recommendations of this report, because I don't believe that the final report does reflect everything that everybody who was a member of that group would have wanted, and that's because of the circumstances in which the final report was produced, i.e. that the members of the group did not formulate them, and I think members will be aware that there's perhaps reasons why people who've been active in the group have perhaps not been able to participate fully. So, Chair, do you want me to go through what I think we should amend, and then we can have a discussion?
Well, are you amending or are you adding? There's two things. Is it in the body of the report you want to amend?
It's to the recommendations.
Oh, well, that's fine. Yes, do.
Okay. So on A, which is about public questions at meetings, it's to add that a facility for supplementary questions to be asked by a video, telephone or written submission, or by nomination of another person to ask the question be provided. As we know, meetings during the day are not necessarily accessible to everyone. A meeting at any time isn't necessarily accessible to everyone. And I know that other members of the group as well felt that the ability to put in a supplement, having seen an answer to an initial question, to put in a supplementary question. And we did have a case at council not too long ago where someone's partner wanted to ask a supplementary question, and they couldn't do that under the rules that we have. So that just to make sure that we do get that.
So, Kate, I'm going to stop you just for a second. This report has been out for some time. There was an opportunity, and I'll ask Simon.
I did put these comments in, Chair.
Well, it doesn't matter. There's an opportunity for people to come back with those comments. Simon, can you just update me as to what feedback you had from the members of the group? Because don't forget that what happened with this particular task group was that we were going to have a meeting, I think, in February, and we then couldn't have it because of COVID. And there was never really a subsequent meeting, but there was an opportunity for people to comment, I think. Simon, would you like to?
So I can update, which is the members did reconvene after COVID and had a meeting where they discussed the draft report. Some changes were made on the basis of that and circulated by email. Yourself and Kate were the two members of the group that came back with some suggested changes. I incorporated some of them and put some of them to the side to discuss at the meeting. A subsequent meeting was held, but unfortunately, a number of the members of the group didn't attend. You attended the meeting and went through those changes. Some of them were incorporated and some weren't. So I sent out another draft to all members of the task group and gave them, I think it was a week or 2 weeks to come back with comment, which they did not. So in which case I sent out another email and said it would be signed off by a certain point. So that's how you've got the draft in front of you. Obviously, this is an opportunity for the committee to take a look at that and make suggestions in terms of recommendations. And if they wanted to make any changes, you as a committee could look at that. But it would be unusual for a task group report to be changed substantially at this stage. But you do have that within your power to do so.
Yeah,
Chair as well, just in terms of Eva was chair of this group, and of course Eva's been taken poorly, so that's the reason we've had less members involved at the end of it, just so other members are aware of the reasons why.
Yeah, and to be clear, I don't think it was that members simply didn't attend the last meeting out of lack of diligence. Members didn't get the invitation to the meeting, and I don't know whether that was because of the IT issues we were having at the time or whatever, but I certainly did not receive an invitation, and I think that's why that happened. I wasn't aware the meeting had happened until it had finished. And having put in these comments, they have not been considered by the whole group, and there seemed little point in a back and forth when there's actually no chair able to deal with it, no prospect of a meeting of the group, I thought it would be better just simply to bring them here. I believe they're within the spirit of the report and within the spirit of the discussions we had at the group. I know Leslie's here and she was on the group and she might want to comment. So if I just go through what they are and then we can have a discussion, and then I'd welcome the thoughts of the committee.
I'm just wondering, in fact, given the comments, that whether we're going to have another meeting to come back to this thing because we're talking about substantial amendments to this report. It is already about a year out. It's a year overdue. I'll leave it. I don't know what other people. No, Kate, I'm just asking other members, do they want to go through lots of details on this report, or do we want to take the report forward? Because if we have lots of additions to it, I think the participation task group should meet again.
Chair, can I just say what they are, and then the committee can decide, knowing what they think I should, that I'm proposing changes.
The first one, which is a very radical change for what there was a discussion about.
It's not radical.
What? There was discussion about it. I mean, don't forget the recommendations go through. We don't have the final decision on that, except for the last one.
That it was very clear in the meetings of the group.
It was very clear from you, Kate. It was
very clear in the meetings of the group that that's what the group wanted.
I'm talking about other members of the group too.
Yeah, that's what they wanted.
No, it was very clear from you. I personally think it goes much too. It'll clog up quite a lot of what happens in the county council. But I'll let anybody else comment on it.
Chair, can I just come in for a second?
Yeah.
I was just trying to ask Simon on a message because this is all about timetabling, isn't it? And if we've got where is this going and where is the urgency for it to go there? And if it's going to presumably Cabinet and then Constitution Committee, because some of these items would be in the Constitution that would need to be reflected there, that feels as though we can adapt. I think it's important that if there are members, we need a proper process that members feel fully engaged in. So I probably support your recommendation for pausing and having chance to consider either digitally or at a meeting the recommendations that Councillor Haig and any other members have put forward, to give them due consideration.
Sean, just to say, at the moment, the report is due to go to the December Cabinet meeting. There is nothing necessarily time sensitive in what's there. There is the one recommendation, which is for yourselves, which would be related to a review of scrutiny as well, which is around the pilot of public questions.
If we've got that, that's the last one.
It would be difficult to have a meeting and make the December Cabinet, I would suggest, but it doesn't mean that you couldn't have an additional meeting to go through the report and go to a future Cabinet meeting.
I would like to propose that, in fact, if other members of this committee are happy that happens. Can I take Mr. Silence's consent?
I would like to speak as well.
So we've got Kevin, Leslie next, and then Kevin.
Well, given that this is about participating, I wouldn't want to think that was the opportunity to participate and produce a useful report would be stymied. So in the light of what's been said so far, I think it probably would be a good idea if we did actually meet again, to make sure that the recommendations that Kate is proposing, and one I wanted to suggest, which I discovered about recently, could be considered. But I would hate to think that this debate was going to be curtailed because of process. This is about getting people to participate. And at the moment, I feel we're rather being the barriers are being erected. So come on, Chair, let's have a bit of flexibility, please.
I'm trying to make certain, just in response, Leslie, that there is a real debate. I mean, there was a participation task group set up. It was unfortunate because of the timings, etc. Basically, the meeting which I had with Stephen, because that's the only one who prepared for the meeting, was more just tidying it up than anything else, which was the draft which had gone out. It's obviously that people haven't considered it. I just feel that it needs a proper focus on the task group rather than at this meeting.
Good idea, but I think
it seems to me that what your comments just now, that you will have some sympathy for that.
I think it would be helpful if we reconvene to talk about it, because I think that the combination of circumstances did stymie what had happened, and I think that there were those of us who didn't pick up that there was a previous meeting which you attended and others didn't. So I think that we just need to be sensitive to the fact that we aren't working in the easiest of times. This is about participation, and let's just convene another meeting and then we can discuss it and present it. I would imagine that any proposals in the report, anything that's considered won't go forward to be put into practice until the beginning of the next term. So we do have time.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else? Somebody else wanted to comment, I think.
And Kate would like to come back.
Okay.
And Stephen.
Kate, I was next.
Sorry, I didn't hear you being called, Kevin.
Can I just say that obviously it's a working group. I think the working group need to reconvene. They need to then come back to this committee with recommendations, which then this committee can then scrutinise and debate. It's no good scrutinising and debating an incomplete report. And I think the report needs to come back here, having gone through that working group, and come back with recommendations to us so that we can then look at it in the full. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Who's next?
Councillor Hay.
Yeah, thank you. My main concern is that we've lost the chair potentially, and we just need to address that.
And
well, there's probably therefore an additional requirement. Simon, I don't know if you can comment on that. Presumably we have to find somebody else, don't we?
You don't, not necessarily. No, you've got a group of members. You can reconvene. You can do that reasonably quickly, and then bring that back to the next meeting of this committee. It was due, like Stephen said, it was due to go to the next cabinet meeting, but it doesn't need to go there. It's
presumably the first meeting of the task group of those who are left will elect a chair for it.
Yes.
That would be the normal procedure.
Yeah, but you don't need any extra members. You can, because the group have been involved so far. You've got Stephen Hurst.
Sorry, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to support the call for another meeting to make sure that we're all aware of Councillor Haig's additional suggestions, which I don't think we are all aware of. And I wouldn't want to make a decision to go forward with this without debating Councillor Haig's added suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you. So if no one else has got anything to speak, let's move forward on that basis, which I'm very happy with. And Steve, we'll pick up the point which you made earlier on in the debate. Thank you very much for that. What's next? We have the annual scrutiny report next, which, sorry, I've lost part of my screen. Anyhow.
Would you like me to?
Who would like to, Stephen, would you like to
introduce
sorry, Simon, would you like to introduce that to a certain degree, just so I get the thing?
I'll just provide a bit of background, because members will recall that the Local Government and Communities Select Committee undertook a review into the effectiveness of scrutiny, and some of the things that they raised that they were concerned about were culture and mindset, resourcing, work planning, and evidence gathering. And I think it's fair to say the culture here at the council is really good. We've got enthusiastic non-executive scrutiny members who, in the most part, I think, are able to leave politics at the door. And one of the things that you need to have engaged cabinet members to make scrutiny work. And I think it's really helpful that we've got a group of cabinet members now. Most of them have held senior scrutiny positions at one time or another. And that I think has benefited the scrutiny process, and we do see the attendance of cabinet members at the various service scrutiny meetings. We're held up nationally for our involvement of district councils. I think we probably do more of that than any other county. And you only have to look at health, look at economic growth, the police and crime panel, and we've even involved district councillors on some of our task groups, and Kate's been looking after the taxi licensing one, and we've involved some district members on that. So that's a really positive part of our scrutiny process. And in terms of our working practices, that was something that was picked up when we did our first review. And we've got a really good culture, I think, of doing narrow and deep reviews into particular issues, and that's allowing members to engage with some of the officers they wouldn't necessarily otherwise engage with. They're not necessarily talking about directors, and that's no disrespect to Steve and to Rob. They're actually talking to some of the officers delivering the services, so they really understand some of the issues. And the breadth of the activity, if you look at that annual report that's been put in front of you, I don't think we realise, both on the member side and the officer side, the sheer level of activity that's been going on. And it's covering a whole range of services, the improvement journey in children's, the impact of COVID. We got up and running fairly quickly after the lockdown, and members were able to get involved and understand some of the issues around the COVID outbreak and the impact on services. And we've done some quite innovative things. Stephen Bass has been involved in developing a memorandum of understanding with the health service in terms of substantial variations for services at the hospital and other places, and that's been really positive. And of course, we've been doing our detailed scrutiny reviews, and you've just been looking at the one on the public participation. We've also developed, we have a member development group that Kate chairs. That's operating very effectively, and members would have seen one of the outcomes that's recently been introduced through that is a new member website, very much in development. We're looking for views from members, but the member development group's been very involved in terms of content for that. And the member development group is also looking at our induction plan for next year. And some of the members of that group have been looking at some of the issues around ICT and testing some software. Both Kate and Kevin have been involved in that side, which has been really helpful. Having said all of that, I recognise that not everything is perfect. There are some areas where a bit more work's required. I think monitoring some of our scrutiny recommendations, we've probably not done that as well lately as we may have done in the past. So that's something that we need to step up on. And I know there are some member concerns, and Ian's raised this, and other members, about the relationship between health and adult social care. And some members feel that those two areas shouldn't be in separate committees. There were reasons for doing that at the time of the review, and some concerns have been expressed around that. Other members think that the current arrangements work quite well. So in terms of where we go from here, this is an opportunity for members to express their views. We'll be looking through the committees to get views back from the members of those committees. We'll be talking to our district colleagues, the district members that are on those committees. We'll be talking to our health partners and other partners that are involved in scrutiny, as well as the directors and the senior officers of the council, just to get a rounded view of where they think scrutiny's at. So that will help to inform the shape of scrutiny following the next election. So that's all I was going to say, Sean.
Thank you very much, Simon. Any questions?
So we've got Ian wants to speak.
That doesn't surprise me. Ian.
Yeah, I'd like to make a statement and a proposal. I'll be brief. So a scrutiny review of how the controversial decision to disintegrate health and care overview and scrutiny committee into separate health and social care scrutiny committees is working, how it's working or not, was due in the spring of this year. This reconsideration was mandated by the motion in March, which forced through this controversial disintegration. Now, I propose now that the necessary review takes place as a scrutiny task group led by Democratic Services and involving not only county councillors, but also the district councillors who were members of the HACOSC until it was disintegrated. I also propose that the relevant senior officers from social care, public health, and also the NHS should also be invited to take part in the review. The report should be produced by the March 2021 meetings of this Overview and Scrutiny Committee, i.e. a year after it was due, and then to the subsequent full council meeting. So that's my proposal that I'd like us to consider today. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we come back to that, are there anybody else want to make any points? And we'll come back to that proposal to consider in a minute. Any other points anybody want to make on separate subjects? Well, let's come back to Ian's proposal then.
So we got Kevin, and Steve, I think, wanted to say something.
I'm saying separating the issue of Ian's proposal first. Is there any other points? Do you both want to talk about separate points, or shall we talk about Ian's proposal first?
I was wanting to mention Ian's proposal, if that's okay.
Okay.
And I was going to talk about something totally separate.
Well, let's talk about the totally separate and get it out of the way first.
Yeah, you mentioned, Simon, that obviously some of the slippage or some of the outcomes and recommendations from the committees are not picked up as well. One of the things I was going to say was it would be quite useful then if chairs and vice chairs were to receive a sheet of recommendations and where they are and where the recommendation has gone to and what they're doing with it, and if it's, and also a date in which we would expect that recommendation to be dealt with, so that then the chair and the vice chairs can then monitor it going forward. And I just thought that would be quite a simple way of fixing that problem, maybe.
If I can help there, Sean. So a process that we used to have was to formally monitor 6, 12 and 18 months. And then anything beyond that the members would have to identify as something they wanted to look at on an ongoing basis. But we can run that kind of process with the chairs and vice chairs, with the lead members of each committee. And it's just something that, we need to improve upon, I think.
Thank you, Simon.
Yeah, can I come back on that? I mean, it's just that if I have a recommendation that comes from our committee and an officer then takes it away, what we need to do is make sure that it's dealt with. And obviously at the moment, we don't necessarily always get that feedback. We might know that it's been dealt with, but we don't always get that feedback. And it would be useful if, when the notes are taken, that those actions are then reported back to the chair and the vice chair so that they can actually watch if there is any slippage.
Okay. Anybody else want to talk about anything before we come back to Ian's proposal?
Actually, Chair, I think that my comment was two ways. To be honest, there was something that was separate. One of the things that I think really works is the coverage of the committees, and we'll come back to that also. The other thing that for me is that's a bit strange, particularly in terms of economic growth scrutiny, is having the scrutiny on the same day as the meeting. And I know Kevin's had problems with that in the past, and I think at the last meeting we had problems trying to get Patrick to come to the meeting because he'd literally just done a 3-hour meeting in the morning. I would be looking, and we could sort this out. I say we, the royal we, could sort this out in terms of the timing, to plan that it's a couple of weeks after, or that gives you time then to watch the meeting, maybe remotely, if you're not in attendance, and actually think, what do we want to talk about that was either in that meeting or separate to that meeting? And it just gives, hopefully, a better coverage of either the same issue that you don't need to hear twice, or actually there's something that's raised that's a good point that we need to think about for next time around. So maybe staggering the meeting, I don't know, 3 weeks after, so you can see the meeting, see what's happened, and then think, actually, which bits do we want that's in that we don't need to see again, or actually do we want to ask that person in to ask some different questions? I just find it a bit, it doesn't quite work for me when we're doing the meeting in the morning and then the scrutiny in the afternoon.
Okay, I'd rather agree. I've studied it for a few years, but Sam, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think
certainly
that's a
like to
fair
comment on it.
point, and that's something we ought to try and address sooner rather than later, because it's not, we don't do that for any other committees. It's kind of historical, and it's something we really ought to address. So you've got some other speakers, Sean. You've got Kate and Brian and Ian. Did you want to come back?
No, you said Kate was next. Kate?
Yeah, so it's Kate, Brian, and then Ian.
Yeah, my point was just on what's just been said about economic scrutiny, so it'd be good to get out of the way if Kate doesn't mind me going first. I think one of the problems with the Economic Growth Scrutiny Committee is it's not really clear whether we're focused on economic growth or focused on the committee. Are we scrutinising the committee's actions because it's covers more than one council area, or are we actually looking at economic growth opportunities and things throughout the community? And I think there could be a tidying up of the remit of the committee, because actually the districts have their own view on economic growth, which they do through their own committee. And I think this committee essentially is actually looking at the cross Gloucestershire Scrutiny Committee, and we should be really focusing on the activities there, which does make sense that we need to understand what goes on in the meetings before we have our meeting. So I support what Steve was saying. Thank you.
Sean, can I just come back there very quickly? Just addressing what Brian said, I think we're conscious that the Economic Growth Scrutiny Committee has had a focus which has been around the joint committee with the leaders that meets before it. And one of the things that's happened recently is there's been some joint work planning so that you're not having that duplication. So the scrutiny committee will be looking at particular aspects and the joint committee will be doing other things, because one of the problems we've had, and I'm sure Kevin's well aware of this because he's one of the people that raised it, is that you're looking at exactly the same things on the same day, and there's little value in that. So there's a new approach in terms of economic growth scrutiny that we're working on now.
Thank you. Who's after Brian?
I think it's me, Chair.
Hey.
Okay, Kate.
Yeah, thank you. I want to comment on Councillor Davies' proposal, but just picking up economic growth scrutiny, it has evolved, and that is one of the things that came out of the scrutiny review, was changing its role. So it might be appropriate to consider when it meets. And I think it's also one of the benefits of the new technology is that you're not taking advantage of members being in Shire Hall, and also people from the LEP, etc. They're in Shire Hall, they might as well be there all day as in the morning. That's not such a factor now. So I think that's something that could be considered. Looking at Councillor Davies' proposal, whilst it probably would have been the right... No, you don't want to do that yet?
Kate, I'm asking everybody else to clear before we come back to Ian Davies.
Okay, but that's why I put my hand up.
Yeah, any other points from anybody? Okay, Ian. Let's move on to Ian Davies' proposal. I think, Steve, you wanted something to speak, and then Kate, I think, was after him, if I'm right by that. Steve?
I'm happy to go at the end, Chair, if you want to get members' stuff out of the way. I'm a lowly officer in this group, so I'm happy to contribute.
Indicating his moment is Kate, isn't it?
And Stephen Hurst as well.
Okay, Kate, would you like to start?
Thank you, Chair. Whilst I understand why the provision for a review was put in place when we did the scrutiny review, which is some time ago now, I feel that doing one now, I think that the opportunity has been missed. Doing one now means that we are actually in the sort of dying days of this scrutiny structure in this council. If we do one now and change it again, we will just be dictating to perhaps a completely different council about how they should do things, and we're at risk of going through quite a considerable amount of upheaval. Although I don't believe that what we've got now is wrong, that we go through that upheaval when there will be no meetings under any new structure should we decide to change it again. So I actually think that what we should put into this report is a recommendation that that review be looked at in the new council term, when of course all things are up for review and change as a new group of councillors decide how they want the authority to look going forward. So that my recommendation would be that we defer any decision on a review of the committee structure until after the new council forms next June.
Thank you, Kate. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very happy to agree with Councillor Haigh that now is not the time to change, when we're going to may well change again in a few months' time. Pragmatically, I think that the current arrangement works very well. The HOSC normally takes about almost 3 hours to meet, and so does the adult social care meeting. So if you put the two together, you've got 6 hours of meeting there. And I think that is not a happy situation to be. And also there's far wider coverage by adult social care and more, and importantly, communities than was ever done before. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I'll just echo what I actually said in my report at the beginning, that I actually believe that the new arrangement, well, the arrangement of having adult social care separately from HOSC has worked well, because in fact it's a huge subject area, and I think it was too much for HOSC. And Stephen's really just, I'm just confirming what Stephen said. And I think it was quite important, in fact very important, that during this year that we have been able to focus on adult social care, particularly during this COVID crisis. So, and I also support the point made by Kate too and Stephen, that I think now is not the time to change, but I think we should look at this. We can always put through a suggestion of or views which can be then considered actually by the new council. Anyhow, Steve, you wanted to come in at the end.
I'd like to come in as well, if that's before Steve.
Well, Brian, all right, Brian, why did you come in? Because Steve wants to come at the end.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think the issue is not whether adult care should be in with HOSC. I think the question is public health. If you look at the remit of HOSC, it doesn't exclude public health. And the remit of HOSC includes district representatives. So we've had the rather unusual situation this year where the health representatives from districts attend a scrutiny committee focused on health, only to find that probably the most important issue of the year, because of the COVID crisis, is not discussed at HOSC. It's discussed at adult care, where they're not able to attend or ask questions. And when you look at the remit, the terms of reference for HOSC, it does not say public health is not included. So I think it's very reasonable for the members of HOSC to expect to be able to address public health issues. Probably in a normal year, this wouldn't really be much of an issue, but as public health is the biggest health issue at the moment, it is. And I think the question is not whether we should be reconfiguring the committees in a big way. I think everybody recognises the workload, but it cannot be right that HOSC and the members of HOSC, when they're addressing their scrutiny duties, cannot question representatives on public health matters, which are a legitimate part of the HOSC terms of reference. I think that's the question that needs to be addressed. If you put it off to the next council, that's probably only going to leave them with the same problem. I think it's something we should be giving them some advice on, personally. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else before Steve?
Can I have the chance to comment, please?
Well, let's see you speak and then let you comment, Ian.
Okay.
But if you want to comment now, do.
Happy to give way, Chair.
Okay, I think what Brian makes a really good point there, that actually public health is duplicated at the moment, or should be actually duplicated under the current structure, even though that is actually wasteful in terms of time. And the public health and social care and also the NHS really belong together. And we've really experienced this, haven't we, through the COVID crisis, where in protecting the NHS by exporting patients who are COVID positive into social care and thereby devastating social care, almost half of the deaths in our county were in social care, shows how the two things need to be dealt with together. That's a very clear illustration of that. But I'd also like to add my comment that in tidying up the remit of the two committees also has to be part of this review. Is it appropriate that in social care we're also dealing with trading standards, with the fire and rescue service? Those services could be scrutinised in other committees. So what I'm saying is that there needs to be a sort of a general review here. And as far as the suggestion that the meetings of the HACOSC would in future be going on for 6 hours, well, when I chaired the HACOSC, those meetings went on for 3 hours. It was about the way that they were, if I may say so, the way they were chaired, and also the remit of the two committees. As I said, the remit has been expanded on social care side to include things like trading standards, which to my view is illogical. So there are really good reasons for this review, which was mandated, which is more than a year overdue. And I'd like us to do what was said we would do in the council chamber. Now, if people believe, and I can understand this, that it would be sensible for it to be reviewed maybe after May, then I'm willing to be flexible on that. But we do need this review to take place, and I think it needs to take place along the lines that I suggested in my proposal. Okay, over to you, Steve.
Thank you. Anybody else want to speak? Steve, it's your turn.
Okay, Chair. So what I was kind of saying is, obviously, as the director that Democratic Services come under, we will help facilitate any review you want to do. I think timing wise after the election would be better for us because we are a little bit busy doing all sorts of stuff at the moment. I think the other bit is it needs to be a member-led review. So I'm less keen on getting officers' perspectives until the terms of reference and the scope of that review has been made clear from members. I think it needs to be what members want in that position. There will always be officers' perspectives on different bits. I think, it is going to be easier and simpler because we've got a director of adult social care and public health from January, but it will also come with other complications. So that could both add and complicate. And I agree with Councillor Dobie about it's not just the meetings, but the scope that needs clarity. So that we avoid the duplication in saying the same thing in two meetings. Although having said that, this forum, as we've said, helps with a bit of that because you can then, with a bit of clever timetabling of the meeting, you can actually look what was discussed at the other meeting, so you're not duplicating it. But I think I'm happy to support, and officers will be happy to support whatever review you want. But I think it needs to be a member-scoped review. What you want, where the boundaries are, rather than a member and officer contributed review. So I think we're happy to contribute once you've agreed the scope.
Thank you very much. Now, what I think is two things have come out of this. First, I'm very happy to support a review during this council, I would think. But that any implementation of it wouldn't take place until after the election, which would give the new council a chance to actually look at any recommendations which would arise from the review. I don't know if I've summed up the general feeling by saying that or not. Can I take silence as acceptance?
No, you've got Kate. You've got Kate. You'd like to say something.
Thank you, Chair. I think that there's two separate issues, whether or not it should be reviewed and when that should be. And I heard quite a lot of people suggesting, including Councillor Dobie at Sepsi, that it might not be until after the election. So I think that the proposal is a review after the election. And of course, everything's up for review after the election, isn't it?
Well, I was saying before the election, so that we could put comments together which could help inform the new council. But I'm quite easy about that. I don't know what other people feel, whether we'd have a review before, so we've got something on the table for the new council, or whether we leave the whole issue to the new council. Ian, what would you prefer?
I would prefer it now because it's overdue by a year, and that was mandated by the original motion to the council. But I can sense the mood of the meeting, so I would be willing to give way on that. But I'd like us to consider it. I mean, I'd like to actually see whether people would prefer it. We've heard from a few people. We haven't heard from everyone on this committee. I mean, what is the feeling of the whole of the committee? Do you, first of all, would you like it now because it is overdue, or secondly, would you like it but after the election? So, can we clarify that? What do people feel?
Chair, could I suggest a compromise? Sorry, I'm the advocate of compromise. I mean, maybe one of the things is to log the comments. And one of the things that officers could do now is to get those comments from Scrutiny members so that we log the comments. And then no matter who is in a seat after the election, those comments about what does and doesn't work are logged, and Dem Services could do that. And then, so what you do with those comments is the debate that comes after the election.
I really like that suggestion. Can we go with that?
I'm very happy with that.
Sean, can I just add to what Steve just said? You know, that's the way I was thinking, an informal process where we seek the views of members and district councillors, and it's an informal process, but then it's something that we can collate and we have available for the new council.
Yes.
Good.
Okay.
Can I suggest that for both this and Ian, thank you for your support for that. And also, I think it applies to the previous comments which were made about the economic development too. So,
Kevin, Sean,
is everybody happy with that?
Well, you got Kevin. Kevin.
I mean, I personally would like to leave it on a little bit because, as you know, my committee is one of the committees that's been not picked on, but singled out for comment. I'm having a meeting with the G1 this afternoon, so there are things that are moving with this committee that I feel that we're still on the journey and we've not got to the end of that journey yet. I mean, and obviously whether I'm elected next time or not, but the point is for us to put comment in until we've finished certain elements of that work would be silly, because obviously we might be commenting on something that may well be programmed into change anyway. So I think that leaving it till next year would be more sensible for us, and just to seek comment. But like I said, I mean, I've got 2 more meetings to go, and the committee may well have information that their comments may well, if they were asked today, may well change by next month or the following month. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Anybody else want to speak? Simon, I think we have enough to go forward on that, don't you?
Hurst, Sean.
Yes, Stephen.
I agree with what has been suggested, with a reminder that we also have some meetings to finish the term, which includes at least one joint meeting of both committees. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Simon, I think there's enough there for you to take us forward.
We've got. Yeah, that's fine. I know where we're going with it, and we'll go through an informal process.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. The last item, I think, is the arrangements for the budget scrutiny meeting. Anybody want any comments on that?
I'm happy to just make a brief comment, if that's okay, Chair.
Do, Steve.
So the report the draft report on the MTFS is due to go out at the December cabinet meeting. So obviously members will have that document to be the focus of quite a lot of the discussion. And unfortunately, last year I wasn't able to take part in the meeting because my little boy had a hospital appointment on exactly the same day. I did observe it on video, spookily. I did manage to tune in and watch it because it was one of the meetings that was streamed, which was quite useful. And I think we'll run the meeting very similar to what has happened in previous times, with staggers in between. And I think through this forum, we've been able to demonstrate that that can work very effectively.
Thank you very much. Anybody else want to comment?
Sure, and I was just going to say that, just to clarify that, members of other committees would be invited for the relevant sections, so that would continue as we've done before. And where it says on the document, council chamber or virtual meeting, it will clearly be a virtual meeting now. That was written some time ago.
Thank you very much. Any other points?
Kevin wanted to come in.
And it's been mentioned several times today. Obviously, we've been forced into this forum because of COVID, but it would be quite useful to do some work on when we come out of COVID, and obviously we then go back to what we class as normal, what normal will be, that we actually try and work out some sort of strategy on how we're going to use what we've been using because we've had to use it, what we used to do before we had to use it, and how we can maybe combine the both. Because I also think sometimes, meeting in this forum for councillors sometimes can actually save us quite a considerable amount of time of travelling and stuff like that, and expense of travelling, especially for working groups and stuff like those sort of things, and task and finish groups. Maybe we might need to look at how we now balance it together. So that might be a piece of work that needs to be done going forward, because we have actually got, we've got now the opportunity of both. Thank you.
I can help there.
Kevin,
I can help a little bit there, because we are now looking at webcasting, a webcasting solution that will be in our council chamber and cabinet suite that will allow for hybrid meetings. So people will be able to join this way and be in the meeting room as well. So that, it's new technology, but we're out to tender for something like that.
Sure.
So, and I think Rob wanted to come in. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to mention. I think that's absolutely right. I mean, there are real benefits of doing things this way that we ought to continue if we can. Not to throw a spanner in the works, so I just wanted to remind members that the legislation that allows us to meet virtually rather than in person is only temporary in nature and expires, I think, in May next year. Now, I imagine there may well be pressure to make it permanent, but as it stands, we just need to bear in mind that for those meetings that have to be conducted, those formal committee meetings that have to be conducted in public, the legislation only allows us to do that via WebEx on a temporary basis at the moment.
Thank you. I think that's an important point, funny enough, for both the participation we've talked about and also the scrutiny review. So it's thank you for that, Kevin, and thank you also. Yeah. Any other points?
Kate wanted to raise a point.
Yes, Kate.
Yeah, I know that the LGA and the Improvement and Innovation Board have been looking at hybrid meetings and how they work. So when we're going out to tender, are we seeking advice from them? Because I know they've had some issues. It's not about the technology necessarily, but about how people behave in hybrid meetings and how you get over the barriers for those who are participating remotely. I mean, I do support that we should continue to have facility to not have to attend in person should the legislation allow, but I just think it'd be useful to get that input from the LGA and the Improvement and Innovation Board.
Yes, we're doing that. We're doing that, Kate, because they've got a hub specific around virtual meetings and hybrid meetings. So yes, thank you.
Thank you. Well, can I thank everybody? I think there's nothing else on the agenda. Good. Thank you all very much. Continue to enjoy the weather. It's quite cold up here today, actually, but there we are. It's been sunny though. So nice to see you all, and we'll meet again, as they say.